This happened less than 1 month ago. I'm currently a senior in high school, and I've spent my entire life living in Nevada. There honestly isn't much to do around here, but one thing my friends and I have always loved is urban exploring. We were always searching for abandoned places, old buildings, forgotten service tunnels, dead malls, anything that looked like the world had simply left it behind. We'd climb over broken fences, walk through empty halls, take photos, and sometimes even make our way up to the roofs or down into dark basements. It was never about destroying anything or doing something illegal. For us, it was just about the atmosphere, that strange feeling of stepping into places people had stopped caring about. The one guy in our group who constantly discovered the strangest locations was Charles. He was the quiet type, a little mysterious, and he rarely explained how he found the places he did. He would just show up with coordinates or photos of spots none of us had ever heard about. Most of the time, I didn't even bother asking where he got the information. One day, Charles sent us a screenshot from a really sketchy Instagram account. The account had very few followers, the photos were blurry, and the comment sections were filled with creepy messages from random people. The caption on the post Charles showed us said something along the lines of dozens of abandoned mine shafts in the Mojave Desert. If you know where to look. According to Charles, he had actually messaged the account, and whoever was behind it had sent him a few general areas to search. That was all it took. From that moment, Charles became completely obsessed with the idea of finding one of those mines. So that Saturday, it ended up being just the three of us, me, Charles, and our other friend, James. I owned a Wrangler, which was perfect for driving through rough desert terrain, so we decided to take my vehicle. We didn't have an exact address or anything precise. All we had was a rough area and a single pin dropped somewhere deep inside the Mojave Desert. The spot Charles had saved was seriously far out. I mean, really far away from anything. We had already turned off the main road almost 30 minutes earlier, and the dirt path we were following barely looked like a road anymore. We kept driving for what felt like forever. There were no road signs, no buildings, no landmarks, nothing at all. Just empty desert stretching endlessly in every direction. I kept glancing at my phone, even though I already knew there was no signal out there. Meanwhile, James was sitting in the back seat, getting more and more annoyed as time passed. Eventually, he started telling Charles that this entire trip was pointless and that he had probably been tricked by some random troll account online. But Charles refused to give up. He kept insisting we should keep searching. And honestly, he's always been extremely stubborn when it comes to directions and navigation, so I decided to go along with it for a little longer. Then, just when we were finally about to give up and head back, James suddenly pointed towards something off to the right side of the trail. At first, it looked like nothing more than rocks and sand like everything else around us. But as we slowly drove closer, we finally saw it clearly. There was a half-collapsed wooden structure built directly into the side of a slope. Part of the entrance had caved in, but behind the remaining wooden support beams, there was still a dark opening leading underground. It wasn't very big, but it was definitely man-made. Without a doubt, it was an old mine shaft. For a moment, Charles didn't say anything. He quietly pulled out his phone, opened the offline map he had downloaded earlier while we still had service, and dropped a pin right on that exact location. Then he looked over at James and simply said, "Told you." James immediately replied that Charles had just gotten lucky. But honestly, even I had to admit something. After driving around in circles in the middle of nowhere for so long, it was kind of unbelievable that we had actually found one. I parked the car a few yards away from the entrance, stopping on a flat patch of dirt off to the side. The three of us stepped out and grabbed our gear. Charles had even brought masks for everyone to wear, which at the time felt a little excessive, but we put them on anyway. We slowly walked up to the entrance of the mine. Standing right in front of it, the place looked even more unstable and sketchy than it had from the car. Charles bent down, picked up a rock, and tossed it into the opening. We all stood there and waited. A few seconds later, we heard it. Clang. Clang. The sound echoed 3 times from somewhere deep below, and then everything went completely silent. That's when we realized just how deep the shaft really was. Charles turned around, looked at both of us, and casually said that if any of us slipped on the way down, we were probably dead. Not exactly comforting, but we started going down anyway. Luckily, The mine shaft wasn't a straight vertical drop. Instead, it slanted downward at a steep angle. It was steep, but not so steep that we had to climb down using our hands. Still, the ground was loose and uneven, and it felt easy to lose your balance. Old wooden support beams lined parts of the walls. Surprisingly, they actually looked pretty solid even after all those years. The deeper we moved into the mine, the colder the air became, and quieter. It was honestly a really eerie feeling down there. After a while, we couldn't see any daylight from the entrance anymore. The outside world was completely gone. Eventually, we reached what seemed like the bottom of the shaft. The tunnel leveled out and opened into a wider area where several other tunnels branched off in different directions. It looked exactly like you'd imagine an old abandoned mine. Every few yards there were more wooden support beams. Rusted metal rails were half buried in the dirt, probably from old mining carts. A thick layer of dust covered everything. Pieces of wood and metal were scattered all around. Some of it might have been parts of old carts or broken tools. The air smelled stale, like the place had been sealed off from the world for years. At that moment, I realized how useful those masks actually were. We picked one of the tunnels and started walking down it. None of us talked much. We weren't searching for anything specific. We were just exploring and seeing where it went. To be honest, there wasn't much interesting down there. It looked like the place had already been stripped of anything valuable a long time ago. Then suddenly we heard something. It was faint, somewhere deeper in the tunnel ahead of us. At first, I thought maybe I had imagined it. But when I looked over, I noticed Charles had stopped walking too. So he heard it as well. James raised his hand and motioned for us to turn off our flashlights. We did. Instantly, everything went completely black. The three of us just stood there in total darkness, listening. Then we heard it again, a scraping noise. It sounded like something being dragged across the ground. Maybe metal, or maybe wood. Because of the echo inside the tunnel, it was hard to tell exactly where it was coming from. But one thing became clear very quickly. Whatever was making that sound was slowly getting closer. We stayed frozen in the dark for maybe 30 seconds, maybe even a full 1 minute. It was impossible to tell. The scraping sound kept coming back, slowly getting louder each time. It didn't sound extremely close yet, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. And then suddenly, James accidentally flicked his flashlight on and then off again. At that moment, I honestly wanted to kill James. The scraping sound suddenly stopped, and the tunnel fell into complete silence. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then out of nowhere, a loud metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. It sounded like whatever had been dragged across the ground had just been dropped. And right after that, a scream. But not a normal scream. It was the most horrible, almost demonic sound I had ever heard in my life. It barely sounded human. The three of us instantly turned around and started running. At that point, we didn't care about the noise we were making. We just needed to get out. I have never run faster in my entire life. While running, I could hear footsteps somewhere behind us in the darkness. The sound alone made my chest tighten, like I was about to have a panic attack. I was in the back, trying desperately to keep up with Charles and James. Then suddenly I tripped. My foot caught on something on the ground, and I almost slammed into the dirt. One of my shoes came completely off, and I struggled to stay on my feet. There was no way I had time to go back for it. So I just kept running, ignoring the sharp pain shooting through my bare foot. Ahead of me, Charles and James had already reached the inclined shaft that led back up to the surface. They were already climbing. I practically threw myself up the slope after them. And when I say climbing that shaft with half a bare foot was the most painful thing I've ever experienced, I'm not exaggerating. It was brutal. Every few seconds, another wooden splinter stabbed into my foot from the old beams and debris along the path. If it hadn't been for the adrenaline pumping through my body, I honestly don't think I would have made it out. By the time I finally crawled out into the open air, my foot was completely wrecked. I could barely stand. James and Charles almost had to carry me all the way back to the car. There was no way I could drive in that condition, so James jumped into the driver's seat. I barely managed to pull the door shut before he slammed the car into gear and hit the gas. As far as we know, nothing followed us up the shaft, but none of us were willing to stay around long enough to find out We drove the entire way to the nearest hospital without saying a single word. The pain in my foot was so bad, I honestly thought I might pass out. At the hospital, they gave me a tetanus shot, cleaned the wounds, and pulled out all the splinters stuck in my foot. Even after that, I couldn't walk normally for several days. A few days later, when I was finally able to walk again without limping too badly, James told us something. Apparently, he had dropped his wallet somewhere near the mine shaft. It probably happened while he was helping me get to the car. He hadn't mentioned it before, but now he thought it might be worth going back to check. Just the entrance. There was absolutely no way any of us were going back inside that mine. So the three of us drove back out into the desert again, using the location pin that Charles had saved earlier. Of course, James's wallet was nowhere to be found. But we did find something else, my shoe. It was lying on the ground just a few feet away from the entrance of the mine. I slowly walked over and picked it up. And the moment I looked at it, my stomach dropped. The shoe was completely torn up, not ripped like it had been dragged across rocks. No, it looked like someone or something had actually bitten into it. There were clear teeth marks pressed into the material, and several chunks of the shoe were completely missing. After seeing that, we didn't stay there for long. None of us have been able to come up with a logical explanation for what happened. Someone might say it was just a homeless person living inside the mine. But if that were true, how could they possibly survive down there for so long? There was no food inside that mine. So what in the world would they even eat? Charles later told us that the Instagram account he originally contacted never replied again when he tried to message them about what happened. And honestly, it's going to be a very long time before I ever go urban exploring in the desert again. I've always been the kind of guy who enjoys rough, simple living. The outdoors has always felt like home to me. When I think about a vacation, I imagine a camping trip or a few quiet days fishing, not some fancy resort or luxury getaway. My girlfriend of 6 months, Tiki, shares that same love for nature. If I'm being honest, that's probably one of the biggest reasons we started dating in the first place. A couple of weeks ago, Tiki and I decided to try something a little different. Instead of forests, mountains, or lakes like we usually do, we packed up and drove out into the desert to camp for a few days. We had both explored plenty of places before, but neither of us had truly experienced the wide, open, silent, dry emptiness that the desert is known for. It felt like the kind of adventure we needed to try at least once. Another big reason we chose the desert was the stargazing. Watching the stars has always been something we both love, probably more than anything else. Even back when we first started dating, we would sometimes drive outside of town at night, park somewhere quiet, lie on the hood of the truck, and just stare up at the sky for hours. So when we found a place online that claimed to be far away from any towns and completely free from light pollution, the decision was basically made for us. The spot was supposed to be remote but still legal to camp on. No facilities, no buildings, nothing fancy at all. Just open land, a few fire rings, and a sky full of stars. To us, that sounded perfect. Early that Friday morning, we loaded the truck with all our gear and started the 3-hour drive. The trip was smooth at first, but the last hour was nothing but a long dirt road that seemed like it stretched on forever. There were no houses, no cars, not even a sign that anyone else had ever been there. Honestly, that was part of the appeal. By the time we finally reached the campsite, it was already late afternoon. Just like I hoped, the place was completely empty. No other campers. No noise, just endless desert and silence. The first couple nights turned out exactly the way we imagined. The days were warm, the nights were cool, and the sky was perfectly clear. Every evening we would sit near the fire with a couple of drinks, pass a small joint back and forth, and talk about random, meaningless stuff. Sometimes we just lie back and stare up at the sky without saying anything at all. Being out there with no schedule, no phones buzzing, and no distractions felt incredibly refreshing. And yeah, sometimes we'd mess around a little in the tent too. That was definitely part of the fun. For the first time in a long while, it really felt like we were completely disconnected from the rest of the world. But both nights, something strange happened. Late at night, when everything else was completely silent, we heard a sound. It wasn't close. It was far away somewhere out in the desert. A low, long, drawn-out noise that echoed through the darkness. It almost sounded like a howl or maybe a moan. It didn't sound human. If anything, it sounded more like some kind of animal. The first night, when the sound drifted across the desert, both of us froze for a moment. Tiki slowly turned and looked at me with a nervous expression, like she wanted to confirm something. "Did you hear that too?" Her eyes seemed to ask. I looked back at her and quietly nodded. We ended up laughing it off that night. I told Tiki it was probably just a coyote or maybe even a mountain lion somewhere out there in the distance. She nodded and agreed. Out in the desert, hearing strange animal sounds isn't unusual. The second night, almost at the exact same time, we heard that same long, eerie sound again. It echoed across the open desert just like before. But once again, we convinced ourselves it was just desert wildlife. After all, there are plenty of animals out there making noises we're not used to hearing. Yeah, it felt a little unsettling, but we weren't about to let it ruin the trip. Then came the third night. That night, something happened that I still can't fully explain. I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night to the faint sound of footsteps outside our tent. At first, the sound was very soft. Just a couple quiet crunches, like someone stepping slowly on dry dirt. I stopped breathing for a moment and listened carefully. Another step, then another. Slow, steady. And that's when I realized something that sent a cold feeling through my entire body. It didn't sound like an animal. The steps were too slow, too controlled. I stayed completely still inside my sleeping bag. I didn't move an inch. Part of me wanted to reach for the flashlight beside me. Another part of me wanted to wake Tiki up and whisper that someone was outside, but I couldn't. I was completely frozen. My heart started pounding so hard it felt like it might give me away. Every muscle in my body felt stiff, like I had no control over it. The footsteps didn't circle the tent. They didn't move past it. They just stopped, right there, a few feet away. And then everything went quiet. For a long time, there was nothing but silence. I stared up at the ceiling of the tent without blinking, waiting, hoping to hear something that would explain what was happening. But whoever or whatever was outside didn't make another sound. I lay there for what felt like forever, silently praying that whoever it was would just walk away. Then suddenly, flick. A sharp sound cut through the silence. I knew that sound instantly. It was the click of a lighter. A small orange glow appeared through the thin fabric of the tent. The light was about waist height, only a few feet away from where I was lying. Someone was standing right outside. The flame stayed still for a few seconds. Then it started moving, slowly waving from side to side. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at that glow through the tent wall, trying not to make a single sound. Then the flame grew. It got bigger. Much bigger. What started as a tiny flicker suddenly turned into a stronger glow, like they had lit something else, maybe a torch. Then, without any warning at all, the person dropped whatever they were holding. I heard it hit the ground with a dull thump against the dirt. And just 1 second later, the side of our tent suddenly lit up bright orange. The heat came fast, much faster than I ever expected. Within seconds, the fire started spreading across the side of the tent. That was the moment that finally snapped me out of the shock I was in. I quickly shook Tiki awake. The second she opened her eyes and saw the orange glow around us, she immediately understood what was happening. There was no time to think, no time to talk. We both started moving. We scrambled inside the tent, grabbing whatever we could and throwing it outside onto the dirt. Backpacks, blankets, gear, anything we could reach. Honestly, I'm still not sure if we managed to save everything. The fire kept spreading while we worked. Finally, we both rushed out of the tent before it got any worse. Tiki grabbed one of our big water jugs and poured it straight onto the burning section of the tent. At the same time, I started stomping on the ground, trying to crush any flames that had caught onto the fabric or nearby gear. It took a few intense minutes, but eventually we managed to get the fire under control. By the time it was out, almost half of the tent was completely destroyed. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the flashlight and started shining it all around the campsite. I was searching for the person who had just tried to burn us alive, but there was no one there, at least no one I could see. The desert around us was silent again. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. Tiki didn't waste any time. She immediately started packing up the gear we had managed to save. I followed right behind her, throwing everything together as fast as possible. Neither of us said much. We just wanted to get out of there. Once everything was gathered, we started walking quickly in the direction where we thought the truck was parked. The problem was it was completely dark. There were no landmarks, no lights, no clear path. We were basically guessing which direction to go. After walking for a few minutes, it slowly became clear that something was wrong. We were lost. We had turned around somewhere without realizing it. Then, maybe about 10 minutes into walking, I heard something that made my stomach drop. That same distant scream, the exact same sound we had heard during the first 2 nights. But this time, it didn't stop. The sound kept going, dragging through the darkness like something was in constant pain. Then suddenly, another scream started, from somewhere else. Then a third one, and then another. All of them were coming from somewhere behind us. And it was clear now, there wasn't just one thing out there. There were multiple. I didn't say a word. I simply grabbed Tiki's arm tightly and started walking faster. Then faster. Somehow, by pure luck, we actually found the truck. The moment we saw it, we both ran. We threw our gear into the back as fast as we could without even organizing it. The second the doors were closed, I jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine. I drove away as fast as the road would allow. But I couldn't go too fast. The dirt road was rough, full of dips and turns, and the only light we had came from the truck's high beams. Every bump felt like it could flip the truck if I pushed the speed too much. It felt like we were driving forever. But eventually we reached the main road. That was the first moment I finally felt like we might actually be safe. I didn't slow down until I started seeing other cars again. Tiki was trying to stay calm, but I could tell she was barely holding it together. It looked like she wanted to cry at any second. And honestly, I wasn't doing a great job comforting her either. Both of us were still in shock. Later, we did call the police and reported everything that had happened that night. But even now, the only thing I keep thinking about is this. If I hadn't been such a light sleeper, if those footsteps hadn't woken me up, my girlfriend and I might have been murdered that night. Right there, in the middle of the desert.